What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the second part of the Inside the Score series for Tranquility, my newest Disney-style piece of music. So back in the first part last week, we took a look at the music theory behind it, took a look at the process and how, I came up with the chords and kind of the progression. So in this video, we're going into the actual MIDI mockup portion of it, taking a look at some of the orchestration techniques and, where those instruments lie together and how they kind of come together to create this nice cohesive sound. So before we start, I'd like to point you to my 10 steps to a clear orchestral sound. It's an absolutely free guide that I think will really help in the context of this type of video because we're talking about orchestral mockups, we're talking about the way the orchestra works together and everything like that. So understanding some, really core concepts about the orchestra, I think will just take your music leaps and bounds to the next level. So if you just take a look at in the description box, the first link will lead you towards that. You can download it absolutely free and just study it and have it with you for your next mockup, which I think will really help you. In addition, as you know, this piece was created for my course Cinematic Music Creation, where I go over the entire process of making music, of music theory, composition, orchestration, arranging it live in front of you, and finally mixing and mastering. So this part I put together, totally live in the course, where we actually went instrument by instrument, tweaking all the MIDI data, voicing the chords individually, all of that stuff, all in front of you. So if you're interested in that kind of process, check out the MIDI module I pulled out from the core course, and it's actually available by itself if you're interested in just seeing how I put this track together piece by piece. Of course, in this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the overall thing now, looking back in retrospect, and we'll take a look at some of the devices there. But if you're just interested in seeing how I put it together piece by piece, then you might be interested in the module called Live Orchestration and Arranging. So I'll also point you to that in the description box. Anyway, let's get into it. So first of all, we start off with this kind of pure intro with this flute and the strings going on, right? So we have this type of thing going. So there's a few considerations, you might know that the flute is a quite quiet instrument in the context of the other instruments. It's one of the more quiet instruments, right? Now, the problem with sample libraries and technology nowadays is that you can do anything. And that is a problem because it's very easy for us to create unconvincing and unrealistic results where if we bring this music to a real orchestra, then, they might, or you might not get the result that you expect. So the reason I bring this up is that the flute being a quieter instrument, it has to be able to shine on its own without having a lot of other stuff interact with it. Because if there's other instruments that are combining with the flute, then naturally the flute's going to be drowned out, being the nature of it being a quieter instrument. So the route I decided to go is just layer the flute in with some strings at the very top. And you can see I've brought in the violins 1, violins 2, and violas. I've also made the strings not too quiet because that would be unrealistic as well. The 3 string sections combining with the flute, it's going to happen that the strings have a little more presence and the flute is going to be lighter in nature and kind of pulled back a little more. But also the consideration was that I wanted the flute to be the solo. So I kind of had to fiddle around with the balances a little bit. And I came up with this balance that I was happy with. So the flute still sits on top because you can still hear the melody. The strings are more of the background. Just a little quick note here. Everything you're hearing is basically the audio files, but I'm kind of using the MIDI files for demonstration purposes because it's kind of easier to see in terms of the orchestration. Okay. So yes, that is the first half of the intro. Then we have this part. So there, the cello actually took over do 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 do, and the latter half of that I actually brought in the flute to layer it with it as well. So what this does is as the music goes up, there also is a crescendo in the MIDI instruments because you want to ride the mod wheel with everything you do. especially with this type of music where it's more emotional and more of a down tempo type of thing. It's very important that we ride the volume and expression at the same time while performing in our lines. So in this case, all the string parts, I rode the mod wheel, I brought it up. So naturally the expression is brought forth. There's a little more vibrato. It feels a little more passionate, right? And then at the very end here, it kind of fades down to a very nice decrescendo. There's a moment of pause, almost like a fermata, and we're not quite sure what to expect. And before we continue on, I should also mention that this is actually the very first piece I've written without the use of a click. So for every other piece I've written, I've been using the metronome just to keep myself in time. And I've also used tempo mapping just to make sure, there's natural, speeding up and slowing down as well, like rubato. But in this piece, I was like, I wonder if I can make a piece that sounds, realistic and human-like due to the lack of there being a click in the first place. So that's the approach that I decided to go for. And I personally think it works. And it gave me some freedom to play around with the time signatures and not necessarily stick to the 4/4 time all the time. So that's something I can recommend as a challenge. If you write with a click consistently, try writing a piece without the click and seeing how that goes. This is naturally more effective for down-tempo pieces, where for more up-tempo pieces, and it's more like military or march-like, then you do want to stay in time. But for pieces like this where it's pulled back a little more, you can experiment with just making your music without a click. So anyway, here we go. Then the French horn comes in. I already mentioned in the description of the official piece, this is influenced by Jon Williams' Luke and Leia's theme from Star Wars, as you can tell. So the French horn is by itself. It has a very robust and round sound, so it has no problem coming above the strings. Now, in that moment there, you can see how the cello came in afterwards. So here we have, one more time, French horn's doing its thing. And the top 3 strings here are literally just holding in a triad every time. You'll also see that the orchestration-wise, I've tried to keep the voice leading very, very smooth. They're moving as little distance as possible to the very next chord. So this allows for a very smooth contour, a very smooth motion, while it allows the ear to kind of focus on the melodic line itself, rather than hearing, oh, the strings are jumping here or they're moving all over the place. We don't want that in a piece like this, or at least in a section like this. We want it to feel more cohesive and smooth and lush, right? So it makes sense to make the voicing a little more connected that way. Now the second half of the verse comes in. So you can see here we run the cello, kind of outlining the bass. And now the basses come in as well. Okay. And then here I've brought in this string Vivaldi tremolos, in addition to the timpani roll, to introduce this crescendo. So it should sound like that. There we go. So anyway, going to the second half, the trumpet's now taking the lead. Over here. Now if we just take a look at both the trumpet and the horn, let me stretch this out a little bit or make it a little clearer. So this top line here is the trumpet. Down here is the French horn. And you can kind of see how the French horn is interacting when the trumpet is holding longer notes. So again, this is the trumpet over here, right? And then the French horn here is basically interacting when the trumpet is holding a longer note. This is just a classic case of counter melody. Melody, counter melody. So the counter melody literally is countering the official melody. That way, it keeps the ear hearing something that's always going on. It doesn't make us feel bored, right? And it just keeps the whole thing moving a little bit further. So that's kind of the idea I wanted to bring up here. Now, you can see in terms of the timpani, I've also kind of used 1 hit per important chord. And I think I decided not to quantize it here, just because I wanted to make it feel slightly more natural. So... in addition, we've also got some choir, again with smooth voice leading, just embracing the textures and enhancing the overall experience a little bit. Now you see here, I've actually put a little bit of a gap right there. And I think it's because I just wanted to have a little more of a human element where they could take a breath and then come back in there. It's barely noticeable, but I think I might have done that because of that reason. And just to, you know what, really quickly show you the instruments I've been using throughout. Sorry about that. For my strings, I'm using Cinematic Studio strings. I think they're perfect for this type of music where it's more romantic and more lush and the vibrato is there. So I typically start my projects with CSS. And then I also brought in Berlin strings violins 1 legato to layer in on top of the violins 1, because the strings from Berlin strings are very detailed and they have this really nice signature sound that layers beautifully with CSS. So it makes it more upfront. Then here we have the bonus Vivaldi tremolo from Cineorg from Cinesamples. Great library. I love this library. Just another instance of Ticelli and the first violins for Divisi purposes, because this library CSS doesn't do Divisi. So it's like if I wanted a second cello line, I have to bring in another cello part. Or I could just make them sustains instead, but I wanted legato. So there you go. So strings, very, very simple. CSS in Berlin. And if you followed my channel for a while, you know that that's the type of combination I really enjoy. For woodwinds, Berlin woodwinds is still the standard for me. It's I think the first woodwind library I purchased and the one I really enjoy. At the time of this recording, Cinematic Studio Woodwinds is not released, so I do not know how that library is. Hopefully it's going along well, development. Anyway, also we have the Holly Woodwinds from Cinesamples, another wonderful library. I've pulled up the major scales. And then also we have Nucleus solo oboe, which is great. And I've used that in the bridge, which I'm about to show you. I think it has a great sound. Between this one and the oboe from Berlin Woodwinds Expansion B, both of them make a very beautiful, sweet tone for the oboe. And then here I've pulled in another flute 2 legato. And then I have some unison tremolos, kind of like da-da. You can think of them like little trills. So yeah, there we go. That's the woodwind section. For the brass, I think for the solo horn I used Cinebrass. Yes, I did. So here, Cinebrass Core's solo horn is beautiful. They also have a solo horn in Cinebrass Pro, but that one has much larger dynamic range. The one in Core is very sweet and ends peaks at around an MF or so. So it was appropriate for this piece. Then the solo trumpet is CSB. 2 trombones I just used for texture. So yep, that is there. And then the solo tuba for the low end as well. And then finally we have 2 horns ensemble true legato and 6 horns true legato as well. And those I used, so the 2 horns I used for texture. Kind of like chordal functions. They have polyphonic legato, so it sounds really cool. You can see, right, so it's basically 4 horns playing in total, two horns per note. But I've tried to keep the intervals themselves not too far because I still want a cohesive sound between the horns. So they're filling in the section quite nicely. They're filling in the gaps in the middle. And we should always have instruments that make the entire thing feel balanced. So that's important for me. And then when we go back into the A section, if we just have a listen to this, you'll notice that the 6 horns have an even richer sound. So again, the importance of the counter melody in this case is so crucial, right? Because when you have the main melody going and it's holding longer notes, the ear doesn't want to just be waiting there with nothing to listen to, even though there's like pad stuff in the background, you know? So it's really important to introduce some counter melody, I think, and this is something I always recommend, is make your counter melodies almost like their own individual melody. Like the player should enjoy playing a counter melody because it should have its own identity and not perfectly matching the main melody, you know? So this type of thing I do all the time. I kind of like to dip down a little bit. I like to go back up, go back down, go back up, because then it gives a sense of natural contour to the line. And I think that makes it more fun and more enjoyable to play. And by the way, we are in F major by the returning A section. So it also makes sense to bring up the intensity of the instrumentation, and that's why you can see, you know, I have some extra instruments when the A comes back, especially the 6 horns legato. I've also introduced the women choir and the men choir later as well when the A prime section returns. So everything makes sense theoretically. That's kind of the point. So actually, going back to the bridge here, if we just have a listen to the oboe. What are the 2 harmonic elements? The harp pluck and also some woodwinds. But I think I also had the choir in there. I just want to make sure. Let me go down. Open up my audio, see what I have. Okay, so I had the mixed choir from Time Macro, Time Micro here. You can just hear their basic triads there. So let's see if I have it up here in my MIDI as well. Okay, so I don't. I think I just deleted the MIDI file. However, that is also present. So it just gives an air, a feeling of air, you know? And then when the strings come in, pull back right away. Let the flute take over right there. Now the oboe takes over. And now the horn takes over, lowering the register by an octave. And now strings take over. So I'm going from woodwinds to brass to strings in the matter of like 5 seconds, you know? And I think that's just the joy in playing around with the different orchestral sections. You can have a lot of fun with this. In addition to that, we also have this modulation to F major. So opens up. And now everything builds up. Timpani, horns, everything. It just opens up. And you hear the tubular bells in there as well. I think I have them right there. I also have the Glock a little bit later, so I'm going to skip forward here. So now we're in the A prime section. Just have a listen. Still got the main melody, counter melody going on. And also you can see I've used entirely Cineperc for the percussion. So my core template for percussion is timpani, cymbals, snare, bass drum, Glock, tubular bells. Very, very classic setup. I mean, nothing out of the ordinary there. And then for this big crescendo, it's literally writing the module for all the instruments, and the combined effect really just brings everything to a really natural crescendo, I think. And then after this, I was like, okay, I really wanted to make it, like, to give it a pining quality, almost melancholic in a way. So then I was like, okay, the flute will do that really nicely. And it's also a little higher as well. Strings to support, and also the other woodwinds, clarinet, bassoon, and then change the section, horn, and the strings. Go up to the bassoon, and then the oboe. So going up in octaves again. And now everyone comes in together. Now, one thing you'll just notice here in terms of the shape, sorry. So, okay, basically the bass line is going down while the melody is going up. And this is something that I think really just expands the field in the ear. It makes us feel like we're getting bigger, right? The entire space is getting larger, so. End on this E flat chord, which is the flat 7 of F major, and of course we want to end on F major because that's the key we're in. Going up with the harp, finishing with the glockenspiel right there, and that's it. A really underrated instrument is the Cineorc. So they have these pre-orchestrated chords, but they lend a really, really beautiful texture to your mockups very quickly. So that's a library I definitely have to recommend that I use, all the time for these types of pieces. So So anyway, that is the structure and that is the orchestration behind Tranquility. You can see that it's a little more varied compared to the other pieces I've written. Even Once Upon a Romance, I kind of stuck to one or two orchestral families per section of the piece. And this one I wanted to incorporate a few more. So that's why you see breaks in certain sections and then they're coming back for a second and then dipping back out. The interaction is really what makes the orchestration feel kind of unique, kind of special in a way, you know. It makes it more interesting, I think. So anyway, that's what I was going for. I hope you enjoyed looking into the process behind this. And of course, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. If you have any specific inquiries about, you know, what instrument I used here or how I use the counter melody in a certain way, just let me know and I'd be happy to answer. Also, before we go, again, I'd like to point you to my 10 steps to a clear orchestral sound. Definitely, I think a helpful guide to help you if you're just getting started with your orchestral mockups and you're looking for, you know, some core concepts to get you up and running and prevent some common pitfalls. So we talk about ranges, we talk about idiomatic writing, we talk about voice leading, we talk about ranges, things, all the things that are very important to consider when you're writing MIDI mockups. Okay. And again, if you're interested to see how I built this piece by piece, then check out the live arranging and orchestration module, which was taken from the full cinematic music creation course. So that on its own is an affordable price if you're just interested in seeing how I put this all together piece by piece. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you in the next video where we'll talk about the mixing and the processing behind Tranquility. Take care. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.